In the long, geological chronicle of our planet, the passing of some lives is as if recorded on an eternal silent track. When he was discovered, he was locked in a death grip with a ferocious velociraptor, claws and teeth deep within each other's skeletons, fixed in time as a fossil that shocked the world. The world thought this was an unending, brutal battle, yet few truly read the extreme calm at the final moment of his life, a tranquility born from letting go. Tonight, by the dancing light of the fire, and with this story you need not effortfully remember, let us wander together into the true path of his life. Bob the Protoceratops, in the cold terminology of paleontology, was merely a sheep-sized animal with a tough, rigid bony frill, neck shield. Yet in that ancient, temperature-shifting desert, Bob used a nearly pious, slow rhythm to resist the fury and cold of the late Cretaceous. This is not an encyclopedic record praising conflict, but a serene, quiet saga about searching for warmth within the embrace of sand and wind, and reconciling with loneliness during the endless long nights. When the blazing sun of the Cretaceous finally sank, the rolling golden heat waves on the horizon began to cool at a speed visible to the eye. This was a primordial desert located in what is today the Mongolian Gobi, where the extreme heat of the day and extreme cold of the night cruelly took turns. Bob stood alone at the edge of a dried-up riverbed, his broad, stocky body exceptionally steady in the dimming twilight, like a gray rock standing in the desert for millions of years. On his head grew a bone frill resembling a broad fan, a symbol of his identity, used to block the scorching sun during the day, and to emit a heavy, low moan in the gales of the Cretaceous. As night descended, the desert winds began to shift direction, from a coarse, angry roar to a fine, long whisper, rustling against his rough skin covered in fine horny grains. Bob slightly closed his eyes, feeling the last trace of daytime heat being ruthlessly pulled away by the darkness. The surrounding temperature began to fall rapidly. This was the harsh law nature had written upon this land. The swift and arrogant predators often fell into a panic at this time, rushing to find sheltered canyons, but Bob had long ago habituated himself to this cold rhythm. He understood that fear resolved no problems. On this boundless steppe with no trees for shelter, the only way to survive was to learn how to find refuge in the very skin of the earth. He slowly began to move his heavy and powerful limbs, stepping onto the fine-grained sandstone that was beginning to feel icy cold, one step at a time, moving with immense stability toward a hidden, giant sand dune. The dunes undulated in the darkness, like waves frozen in time, emitting a cool and sacred shimmer. Although the sand grains on the surface had been blown icy cold by the night wind, one only needed to dig downward a few inches to find, imprisoned within, the daytime sun's residue, the most generous and gentle warmth. Bob stopped on one side of the sand dune and slightly lowered his head, using his hard, beak-like mouth to lightly test the texture and softness of the sand. Subsequently, he began his actions. His front limbs had wide and strong claws, perfectly suited for heavy and monotonous labor in the dry earth. He was not anxious. Every action of moving his front limbs was slow and deliberate. The sound was sha, 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 the extremely healing and regular noise of sharp claws rubbing against sand. Warm, fine sand rolled outward to both sides with his movements, raising tiny sand mists against the quiet night sky, which then drifted down like shattered gold in the moonlight. With the depth of the digging, a round, comfortable little nest, perfectly fitting the contour of his body, gradually took shape in the heart of the dune, radiating an alluring warmth. This process continued for a long time, so long that the stars in the sky had quietly shifted position, so long that the entire desert had fallen into a silence nearly akin to a vacuum. Bob did not feel weary. For him, this monotonous digging was more like a bedtime ritual, allowing him, in this rhythmic motion, to slowly unload a whole day's guardedness and tension. In that distant era filled with competition, the Protoceratops tribe was often misunderstood as timid existences with absolutely no power to strike back. People always felt that their unhorned faces and small statures were destined only to be the tasty meals of swift predators like the velociraptor, but this view overlooked the inner resilience that was their core. Although Bob did not possess, like the later Triceratops, giant horns sufficient to pierce through everything, his rigid neck frill composed of pure bone and his skull thick as a shield were equally an unbreachable fortress. Over the long course of his life, he had countless encounters with those self-important small-scale hunters who relied on speed to wander in the dark, searching for a gap in which to take a bite. However, the weapons Bob used most often when facing provocations were never angry roars, but near-cold immobility and composure. Once, two young velociraptors, using the cover of night and treading with silent steps, stealthily approached the edge of the sand dune where Bob was resting, their eyes flashing with the ferocious light of hunger. When they suddenly lunged forward, attempting to tear at Bob's throat with their signature sickle-shaped toe claws, what awaited them was a neck frill as hard as granite and a fierce ramming by a swinging head. Bob only made the most precise defense at the most critical moment. Subsequent momentum sent the predators falling heavily onto the sand, the sound of bones splintering exceptionally clear in the night air. He did not pursue them to victory, nor did he display any ecstatic joy of defeating an opponent. He simply stood silently in place, using a cold and profound gaze to observe the wounded and fleeing rivals. That restraint and composure displayed in absolute crisis were the true secrets of how he was able to safely spend countless dark nights in this cruel Gobi. When the disturbance again subsided, the desert midnight displayed its most magnificent and, simultaneously, most infinitesimal side. Without the daytime sandstorms, the sky was as clean as a massive piece of flawless black velvet, covered in ancient star clusters dense as silver powder. Bob returned once again to that small sand nest he had excavated with his own hands. He slowly bent his limbs, pressing his heavy belly onto those deep-layer sand grains that remained intensely warm. That feeling of warm enveloping spread instantly from the four walls of the little nest, quickly infiltrating his weary muscles, ligaments, until warming the bone marrow that was slightly stiffened from the cold. He began gently using his hind limbs to tread and kick, allowing his body to sink deeper into the sand, until those soft sands spilled over his back, leaving only his head and neck frill exposed. At this moment, Bob seemed to become a part of this sand dune, or a giant egg gestated by the earth, enjoying an exquisite sense of security within the darkness's embrace. His breathing at this moment became exceptionally long. Every inhalation had the warm air turning in his broad nasal cavity, every exhalation carried away a trace of ancient burdens deep within his body. The wind, at this time, became lighter and lighter. It no longer attempted to scatter the sand dune, but was like a gentle mother using light fingers to caress Bob's wide bone neck frill. Within this exquisite stillness and warmth, the light in Bob's eyes began gradually to dissipate, his eyelids became heavy as 1,000 caddies, and all the noise of the surrounding world faded from his perception. However, the laws of Cretaceous fate never shifted by the will of any single life. On this desolate earth, eternal tranquility was often accompanied by the most unexpected, sudden upheavals. At the end of that seemingly ordinary night, a sudden earthquake triggered a whole-scale collapse of the loose sand cliffs above the ancient plains. Hundreds of millions of tons of red sand surged downward in the darkness like a tsunami. The great change occurred silently, with no boom, only sand waves heavy as mountains engulfing everything in an instant, sweeping Bob, who was sleeping in his sand, and a velociraptor that happened to be lurking to the side, down into a bottomless abyss. At the final moment, imprisoned by hundreds of millions of flowing sand particles, Bob woke up from deep sleep, instinctively feeling absolute heavy pressure from all sides. It was a despair where even air was stripped away. That velociraptor, out of utter panic, struggled madly within the flowing sand, its sharp claws deathly gripping Bob's neck frill, attempting to find a non-existent support point. But within this sand sea as heavy as iron, any struggle only accelerated the descending countdown of life. The world in this instant became extremely crowded, yet extremely quiet. After experiencing initial instinctive struggle, Bob very quickly gave up resistance. He felt the agony of mud and sand rushing into his respiratory tract, but within his inner depths, there inexplicably welled up an extraordinary feeling of letting go. He no longer paid mind to the scratching of that predator existence that had similarly fallen into a desperate plight, but slowly, for the final time, relaxed his body, allowing the warm red sand to completely envelop him. Two archenemies silently embraced each other in the dark depths of the sand sea, furious life force rapidly vanishing under the sand granules' pressure, until their heartbeats in unison returned to nothingness. Wind and sand continued to accumulate above, smoothing it into a perfect arc, sealing this collision forever within the time capsule of dissolution and mineralization. As 70 million years passed like a gust of wind, when the desert of former days became today's desolate archaeological excavation site, Bob's story finally returned to the light of day. That great fossil, named Dinosaurs in Battle, emitted a cold and shocking sheen under the mercury lamps, causing countless visitors to gasp in awe at that ancient brutality. People discussed the Cretaceous's cruelty, analyzed the predator's attacking techniques, yet few could pierce through those cold bones to see that once warm sand. Actually, for Bob, that sudden collapse merely allowed him to go within that exquisitely comfortable, warm dreamscape, toward an ancient eternal sleep from which he would never again wake. He did not die from the torment of sickness, nor from the agony of hunger, but within the embrace of his most beloved sand, eternally fixing his life in the calm posture he was most habituated to. Truly strong lives never need to prove themselves through conquering the world, they only need to find the most comfortable way to exist with this world within their own corner. Now, perhaps you too are lying within your own personal, warm sleeping, surrounded by no Cretaceous gales, nor those unknown crises lurking in the shadows. Those petty matters that made you feel anxious and tense during the day, in the face of the boundless river of time, are actually only an infinitesimal grain of sand dust within the boundless desert. The earth will, just as it enveloped Bob millions of years ago, use gentle gravity and boundless night to silently cradle your weary body, carrying away all your anxieties. The night is already deep, the wind is currently moving through the gaps of the modern city, emitting a sha-sha low whisper. Close your eyes to search for that distant dreamscape of your own, warm and tranquil. Good night, Bob the Protoceratops, good night, every single soul that longs for sleep within the sand sea.